The lawyer's voice was a dry, emotionless drone, but the words he read from my father's will landed like physical blows. To my son, Leo, I leave the sum of $50,000. I waited, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs for the rest. There was no more. Then, the lawyer cleared his throat and delivered the line that would shatter my world. This is for my illegitimate son, so he may find his own way in life. The word, *illegitimate*, echoed in the plush, silent room. I felt the blood drain from my face. My two brothers, Mark and Theo, sat across the polished mahogany table. They didn't flinch. They didn't look surprised. A small, almost imperceptible smile played on Theo's lips. Mark's expression was granite. Our father was a millionaire many times over. This wasn't about money. This was a final, cruel act of erasure. A message from the grave telling me I never truly belonged. The shame was immediate and suffocating. The expensive Persian rug beneath my feet seemed to shift. The walls of the lawyer's office felt like they were closing in. Illegitimate. How could that be? My mother's face, her kind and gentle eyes, flashed in my mind. She would never have been unfaithful. The thought was unthinkable. Yet in that single, brutal moment, my entire life snapped into a new, horrifying focus. All those childhood birthdays my father had missed, all my achievements that were met with a dismissive nod while my brothers were celebrated. The constant, unshakable feeling of being the odd one out, the disappointment. It all made a terrible, tragic sense. The hot flush of shame was quickly followed by a cold, gripping numbness. I looked at Mark and Theo. Their stony silence was a confirmation. They had known. They had always known I was considered less than them. This was about more than wealth. It was about dismantling my very identity. Stumbling out of the office building, I stood on the busy sidewalk, the city noise a distant, muffled roar. The world moved on, completely unaware that my life had just been fractured. Theo was the first to follow me out. He placed a heavy hand on my shoulder. Look, Leo, don't take this too hard, all right? You're still family. His words were hollow, and his eyes, when I met them, were completely empty. They told a different story, a story where I was nothing. Then Mark strode out, not even granting me a glance. He slid into the driver's seat of his sleek, expensive car and sped away, leaving me in a cloud of exhaust fumes. I was left clutching the lawyer's thin envelope, a token payment for a lifetime of being a son. The walk back to my modest apartment felt endless, each step a reminder of the vast chasm that now separated me from the life I thought I knew. That night, I stared at the ceiling, the word illegitimate burning behind my eyes. My name is Leo, and for as long as I can remember, I felt like a guest in my own family. My father, Arthur, was a titan of industry, a man who had built a business empire from nothing through sheer force of will. He was stern, uncompromising, and valued ambition and strength above all else. My brothers, Mark and Theo, were carbon copies of him, loud, confident, and naturally gravitating toward success and power. I was the anomaly. I was quiet, introspective, and found solace in order and patterns. I became a data analyst, a profession my father never understood, often calling it a hobby, not a career. The house I grew up in was a sprawling, beautiful mansion, but it was never warm. The only true warmth had come from my mother, a gentle soul whose laughter used to fill the halls. After she died when I was 15, the house became a cold, echoing museum of our dysfunction. A specific memory from my childhood always haunted me. I was 10 years old, and it was Christmas morning. The tree was towering, adorned with expensive ornaments. My father handed Mark a sleek new laptop. He gave Theo a sophisticated designer watch. Then he turned to me. His gift was a thick, dense book titled Principles of Business and Success. He said, "This will teach you something useful, Leo. You need to learn how the real world works." I remember forcing a smile, my small hands struggling with the weight of the book. Later, I crept downstairs and overheard him talking to my mother in the kitchen. "He needs to be tougher," my father grumbled. "The world isn't going to coddle him." I saw the profound sadness in my mother's eyes before she noticed me and shooed me away. She was always my defender, whispering, "Just be yourself, Leo. That is always enough." But in that house, under my father's judgmental gaze, it never, ever felt like enough. About a week after the soul-crushing will reading, I forced myself to return to my father's house. It was a strange feeling walking up the familiar driveway, knowing it was no longer my home in any sense of the word. I was there to collect the last of my personal belongings from my old room. I found Mark and Theo already inside, standing in the grand living room as if they owned the place, which, according to the will, they now did. They were helping themselves to our father's prized whiskey, the crystal glasses clinking. "Leo," Mark said, his tone flat. He didn't offer me a drink. "We boxed up your things. There by the front door." I nodded silently and walked up the wide, curving staircase, my footsteps echoing in the oppressive silence. My old bedroom was at the end of the hall. I pushed the door open to find it completely stripped bare. All my books, my old computer, my childhood photo albums, everything had been haphazardly thrown into 3 cardboard boxes. It was as if I had never existed. The only thing left on the wall was a small, simple painting of a landscape. It wasn't valuable, but it was the one my mother had loved most. She always said it reminded her of peace. I reached out to take it. "I wouldn't touch that if I were you." Theo's voice came from the doorway. He was leaning against the frame, arms crossed, wearing that slippery, knowing smile I'd come to despise. "That's part of the estate's value now. It's not yours to take." My hand froze in midair. "This was Mom's," I said, my voice tight with emotion. "She told me I could have it." Mark appeared behind Theo, a solid, imposing figure blocking my exit. "Mom's gone, Leo," he stated coldly. "And this isn't your home anymore. You got your money. Now you need to leave. It's time to move on." They stood there together, a united front, blocking the doorway. I looked from one face to the other. These 2 men I had shared a childhood with, whom I had called my brothers for over 30 years. And they were literally throwing me out of my own home. The betrayal cut deeper than any will. I turned back to the empty room, my heart hammering, and walked toward the boxes without another word. I carried the 3 heavy boxes down to my car, one by one. Each step down the grand staircase felt like a mile. The ornate porch light was on, casting a harsh, judgmental glow on my shame. I shoved the last box into my trunk and slammed it shut, turning to take one last look at the house. The massive front door was already closed. Through the large window, I could see their shadows moving inside, continuing their lives as if I had never been there. I was officially locked out, not just from a building, but from my family, my history, my past. It was in that moment that a new emotion began to stir within me, cutting through the grief and humiliation. It was a cold, sharp, and determined anger. They thought I would just slink away and accept their lie. They had no idea who they were dealing with. That night, back in the quiet of my small, impersonal apartment, I made a decision. I would not simply accept this. I was a data analyst by trade. My entire job was to find patterns, uncover truths, and solve complex puzzles from a mess of confusing information. I would treat this personal catastrophe like my most important professional case. The first piece of data I needed was the truth about my parentage. I needed irrefutable proof. Was I truly illegitimate? But a crucial question nagged at the back of my mind, a logical inconsistency. If I was illegitimate, why had my father waited until after his death to reveal it? Why had he allowed me to carry his name, to grow up in his house for all these years? It made no sense. There was a missing variable in this equation, and I was going to find it. My first concrete step was to get a DNA test. I needed to know my own biological truth. But there was a major problem. How could I get a sample of my father's DNA? He was gone, buried. Then, I remembered a small detail. My father was a man of rigid habit. For over 40 years, he had visited the same barber, a man named Joseph, for his weekly shave and haircut. I drove to the old-fashioned barber shop, the bell above the door jingling as I entered. The elderly barber, Joseph, recognized me immediately. "Leo," he said, his kind face softening with sympathy. "I heard about your father. A great man. I'm so sorry for your loss." I thanked him, my throat tight. Then I asked, my voice carefully casual, if he might have any of my father's old personal items, perhaps from before he passed away. Joseph thought for a long moment, wiping his hands on a towel. You know, he said slowly, I do have his personal razor. The silver one with his initials engraved. He kept it here for his shaves. I was meaning to return it to the family. My heart began to beat a wild, hopeful rhythm against my ribs. This was it. This was the key. Joseph, I said, trying to sound earnest and sentimental. Could I possibly have it? As a keepsake? To remember him by? He looked hesitant, his eyes searching my face. Well, he finally relented. I suppose it should go to family. He disappeared into the back room and returned with a small, worn leather case. Inside, nestled on velvet, was the silver razor, AW elegantly engraved on the handle. It was perfect. It would be covered in his skin cells. I thanked him profusely, my hands trembling as I took it, a pang of guilt for the deception quickly overshadowed by my desperate need for answers. I immediately packaged the razor with extreme care, along with a sample of my own saliva, and sent it via a secure courier to a private, discreet DNA laboratory. Then, the most agonizing part began, the wait. The 2 weeks it took for the results to process felt like 2 years. Every day, I compulsively checked my email, my stomach lurching with every notification. Every ring of my phone sent a jolt of adrenaline through me. My brothers called me once during this time. It was Theo. So Leo, have you calmed down yet? He asked, his tone patronizing. You should really be grateful for what Dad gave you. It's more than some people get. I listened to his fake, condescending concern, saying nothing, just letting him talk until he hung up. The interaction only fueled my resolve. Finally, the email arrived. The subject line was stark and simple. Your DNA results are ready. I clicked the link, my fingers shaking so badly I almost missed the button. The screen loaded, displaying a page full of technical terms and graphs. My eyes scanned frantically, skipping the jargon, searching for the only thing that mattered. And then I found it. In bold, undeniable text, it read, Probability of paternity, 99.98%. I read the line again, and then a third time. A choked sob escaped my throat, but it wasn't born of sadness. It was a wave of pure, fierce, vindicating relief. I was my father's son, his biological son. The label illegitimate was a vicious, calculated lie. But the relief was instantly followed by a deeper, more profound confusion. Why? If I was his real son, why had he treated me with such disdain my entire life? Why had he hated me so much that he would attempt to destroy my name after his death? The DNA result was a monumental fact, but it was not the whole story. I needed to understand the motivation behind the lie. Armed with the truth of my paternity, I began digging deeper into my parents' past. I pulled out the old photo albums I had rescued from the house before the will reading. I spent hours sitting on my apartment floor, poring over the faded pictures. There were photos of my parents when they were young and newly married. My mother was radiant, her face full of hope. My father looked at her with unmistakable adoration. But as I looked at pictures from after my brothers were born, I noticed a subtle shift. The look in my father's eyes when he gazed at my mother had changed. The adoration was gone, replaced by a distance, a coldness that was barely perceptible, but to my now analytical eye, definitely there. It was a clue, a pattern beginning to emerge from the noise. This visual clue reminded me of a physical artifact. My mother had a beautiful old wooden chest she called her memory box. It was where she kept her most treasured items. After she died, I remember my father having it moved to the attic out of sight. I was sure it was still there. I had to get back into the house. I waited for a day I knew Mark and Theo would be a long business meeting out of town. Driving there, my palms were sweaty on the steering wheel. I used my old key, half expecting it not to work, but the lock turned smoothly. The house was profoundly silent and empty, a hollow shell. I crept up to the attic, the stairs creaking under my weight. The attic was dark, dusty, and filled with the ghosts of our family's past. It smelled of old wood and forgotten things. In a far corner, partially hidden under a dusty white sheet, was my mother's chest. My heart hammered against my ribs as I lifted the sheet. The lid was heavy. Inside, I found a treasure trove of her life. Her delicate wedding veil was folded carefully. Beneath it were my own tiny baby clothes, smelling faintly of lavender. And at the very bottom, wrapped in soft cloth, was a stack of small, leather-bound books. Her diaries. I carefully gathered them up, my hands trembling not with fear now, but with a desperate hope for answers. I sat right there on the dusty floorboards and opened the first one. Her elegant, flowing handwriting filled the pages. Her voice so clear it was as if she were in the room with me. I read about her daily life, her hopes for us boys, her small joys and worries. Then, I found an entry dated from the year before I was born. The words made my blood run cold and my breath catch in my throat. She wrote about my father's profound devastation. He had discovered, through medical tests, that he was completely infertile. He could never have children. The doctors said it was an absolute impossibility. He was heartbroken, feeling like less of a man, obsessed with the idea of having an heir to carry on his name and legacy. The diary entries that followed detailed a painful secret. My father, in his desperation, had turned to his best friend, our family doctor, a man named Charles Evans. He had asked Charles to secretly father children with my mother. It was a clinical, heartbreaking arrangement made to preserve my father's public image and give him the family he craved. My mother, out of love for my father and a deep desire to make him happy, agreed to this painful deception. Mark and Theo were the result of this arrangement. They were Dr. Charles Evans's biological sons. This was the secret that had festered at the heart of our family, the truth my father could never bear to face. I kept reading, my eyes flying over the pages, consuming the story of my own origin. Several years after my brothers were born, my mother wrote about a miracle. Against all odds, she was pregnant. The doctors were baffled. They had no medical explanation for it. But my father was not joyous. He was furious and distant. He refused to believe the child was his. He was convinced my mother had resumed her affair with Dr. Evans. He accused her of betrayal, his resentment poisoning whatever love they had left. But my mother swore in her diary, with a fervent and desperate honesty, that I was his. The dates lined up perfectly with a rare, intimate moment they had shared. I was that child. I was the miracle, the only true biological son of Arthur Wilson. And he had hated me for it. I closed the final diary, the soft leather cool against my skin. The puzzle was finally, completely solved. The picture it formed was more heartbreaking and twisted than I could have ever imagined. Mark and Theo were not my father's biological children. They were the sons of Dr. Evans. I was his only real son, and he had spent his life punishing me for it. He saw me as a living, breathing reminder of his own infertility, of the secret he had orchestrated but could not stomach. The illegitimate label in the will was his final, bitter act of revenge against my mother's memory and my very existence. He gave his name, his wealth, and his legacy to the sons of another man, and tried to destroy his own blood. A strange, powerful calm settled over me. The confusion and rage were gone, replaced by a clear, crystalline clarity. I had the truth. Now it was time for justice. I went to a new lawyer, a sharp, reputable woman completely unconnected to my father's circle. I laid everything out for her, the DNA test results, the photocopied pages from my mother's diaries. She was visibly shocked by the story. She confirmed that the will was based on a fundamental fraud and a deliberate falsehood. We had an overwhelming case to contest it. Together, we meticulously prepared and filed the legal papers. I instructed her to ensure Mark and Theo were formally served these papers at their office, in front of their colleagues and staff. They didn't deserve a private warning. The day they were served, my phone erupted. First, it was Theo, screaming so loudly I had to hold the phone away from my ear. "What is this garbage, Leo? How dare you drag our family's name through the mud like this?" I remained perfectly calm. "I suggest you read the documents thoroughly, Theo. All the answers are there." Then Mark called. His voice was low, quiet, and far more dangerous. You have just made the biggest mistake of your life, Leo. We will bury you. We will destroy you. I felt no fear. The truth is already out of the box, Mark. I replied evenly. You can't destroy it. I hung up, a small, grim smile touching my lips. I imagined the panic in their offices, the frantic calls to their own lawyers. They were no longer the rightful heirs. They were the imposters, and they knew I held the proof. The final meeting with the estate executor and a family lawyer was held in the same opulent room where this nightmare had begun. I walked in with my lawyer, my head held high. Mark and Theo were already seated, their faces pale masks of tension and suppressed fury. They refused to make eye contact with me. My lawyer professionally and methodically presented the evidence, the irrefutable DNA report and the damning diary entries. The will was declared null and void, invalidated by the founder's own fraud. The entire estate, the company, the properties, the investments, would now pass to me, Arthur Wilson's only biological child and rightful heir. The power dynamic in the room had not just shifted, it had been completely overturned. After the formalities concluded, I stood up. I looked directly at Mark and Theo, these two men who were now legal strangers to me. You have 1 week to remove your personal belongings from the house, I stated, my voice steady and firm. It belongs to me now. All of it. Theo began to sputter, a plea forming on his lips, but Mark shot him a sharp, silencing look. Mark's gaze then met mine, and I saw a hatred there so pure it was almost fascinating. But beneath the hatred, clear as day, was raw, undiluted fear. They had lost everything. The name, the wealth, the power, the legacy. They had lost it all to the brother they had spent a lifetime dismissing as illegitimate. I sold the cold, empty mansion, kept my mother's painting and her memory chest, and donated a significant portion of the wealth to a children's charity she had loved. I bought a small, sun-filled house by the ocean, where the light streams through the windows every morning. I found a peace I never knew existed. So, I leave it to you. Did I do the right thing by exposing the truth? Or was I wrong to tear my family's secret wide open?